A very warm welcome once again to all our attendees, and thank you very much for signing up and joining this Masterclass series webinar number 9. Uh, the Masterclass series, as all of you know, is what Flame University School of Business started off in order to, look at delivering good sessions to people on contemporary topics with some academic content in them. Today, it's my pleasure and privilege to have Professor Smita Chaudhry, who is the chair of Department of Human Resources at Flame University, and a dear colleague of ours. Smita is an uh, you know she comes from a dual Ivy League pedigree institution. She was with IIM Bangalore for her PG, and she did her FP or a doctorate program from IIM Calcutta before she joined Flame. She's worked earlier in the industry in PricewaterhouseCoopers in the capacity of a consultant. So she's been a consultant in multiple areas. So like a consultant, I'm sure Smita, you would have gone through various multiple projects in various areas. That should help us in the session that we do today. She leads the HR department at Flame University and is also an active part in all the webinar series that we do. So Smita, thank you very much on behalf of the School of Business for having agreed to take a masterclass session here. To all our attendees, the format of the session pretty much remains the same. Smita will be giving us a short session on about 35-40 minutes or so, and then followed by Q&A section, which I will curate and ask on your behalf. The Q&A box is open for all of you right from the time go. Please feel free to go ahead and ask your questions here to this masterclass master, Smita. So without any further ado, Smita, I would like to have you deliver your session today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dheeraj. That was a very glowing introduction. I'll just share my screen. Okay, just a minute. Can you see it?
No, not yet, Smita.
Okay.
Yeah, it's coming up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this masterclass. So in this masterclass, we will be talking about using research to improve employee performance. So this is what we are going to cover. We are going to talk about what is research all about? Why are we talking about using research to improve employee performance? When do we use research to improve employee performance, and how do we go about it? Okay. So first of all, let's start with what is employee performance. Now, to talk about employee performance, we first need to talk about what is organization performance. So when we are talking about organizational performance, we are talking about the different measures which we use to define organizational performance. Now, these measures are varied. So it can be profit, it can be sales, it can be revenue, dividends, stock prices, costs, market share, a lot of other such measures. One of the biggest contributors to organizational performance is employee performance. That is the performance of the employees which work in the organization. Now, there are two kinds of dimensions for one is employee outcomes and the other is employee attitude. Employee outcomes again can be of multiple kinds: turnover, productivity, retention, absenteeism, contribution, competency. When turnover is low, productivity is high, retention is high, absenteeism is low, contribution is high, competency is high, employee outcomes are positive and favorable to employee performance. The other dimension is attitude. Some of the employee attitudes which are conducive for employee performance are employee engagement, employee commitment, satisfaction, and motivation. So this is how employee performance relates to organizational performance. Now, what is research? So research, as we understand, is using data to understand a phenomenon. Now, what exactly does this constitute? It constitutes a scientific method, factual data, which is data based on facts in an organization, theoretical basis, which means assumptions which are clearly specified beforehand, and statistical tools. There are two kinds of research which we can do. One is examining a phenomena and the other is exploring a phenomena. So what does examining a phenomena mean? It means trying to understand how certain things work in an organization. It's trying to examine the how question of an organization, and it generally uses quantitative data. The other is exploring a phenomena when we are trying to understand why things work in a certain way, and that uses qualitative data. So quantitative data means that numerical data is used, where all data is in terms of digits. And qualitative data is when data may exist in terms of digits, numbers, or descriptive paragraphs, textual data. And this research is for organizations in a specific country, in a specific industry, or it can be for a specific organization also. Now, we may think that research and analytics may mean the same thing, but there is a slight difference. So we all know what analytics is. Analytics is understanding current performance and predicting future performance. So it is all about understanding and predicting performance. Generally, we work with known variables in analytics. We try to identify trends and patterns. We generally use analytics for decision making, which may be both strategic and tactical, which means that it can be long term or it can be day to day. Analytics is used and executed and studied on an ongoing basis, and we are working mainly with numerical data in analytics. Now, when we are talking about research, research is about discovering drivers and inhibitors of performance. So there is a slight difference from analytics. We are trying to figure out what drives performance or what impedes performance. Here we are working both with known and unknown variables. We are trying to identify cause and effect relationship. So what leads to what and how? Research is generally strategic in nature. It is one time and it uses both qualitative and quantitative data. So what is happening in research is that we are trying to identify certain variables which may be important for the performance, and we are trying to define the relationship for the organization between the variables. So we know what to expect, what kind of relationships should we expect between the variables. And when that is in place, we can do analytics to make sure whether the relationship which was expected is actually showing results in actual day-to-day operations or not. So in a way, if research is done properly in an organization, it can lead to very effective analytics. Now, why use research to improve employee performance? Research is needed to find out impact which certain initiatives may have on performance. Now, because we are talking about employee performance, I will talk about HR practices initiatives. Recruitment, talent management, performance management, compensation and benefits, learning and development, change management, and industrial regulations are different kinds of practices and initiatives which will have an impact on employee performance, which can be of multiple kinds, which we have discussed. Now, the problem is that we never know whether this impact is desirable and whether it is effective. So this question always remains because it is very difficult to measure the impact of these practices and initiatives. It's very difficult to quantitatively measure the impact. So that's why there is always a doubt whether what we are doing is actually helping out the way it is intended to. What does research do? Research helps in three main ways. First is that it helps to assess the direct impact of these initiatives on performance. Second, it helps to examine reasons for a weak impact of some of these practices on performance. And third, it helps to identify ways in which the impact of these programs can be brought about on performance. What does that lead to? That helps to minimize experimentation with HR practices and initiatives, which helps to eliminate futile programs, helps to focus on useful programs, and creates effective programs. Essentially, how that helps? It helps to reduce cost, reduce time, and reduce effort. And why is that important? Because for any program which an HR department or an organization comes up with, there is a cost attached to it. There is, a time. There is a time which is spent on designing and rolling out the program, and there is an effort associated with this. Now, if we can find out which programs are not working, which programs are working very, very well, we would be able to just focus on what is important and eliminate what is not. And thus we can save on cost and effort. Why not the alternatives? So there are two main alternatives for research. One is best practices and one is benchmarking. Now we are all aware of what best practices and benchmarking mean. And most of the organizations prefer to go for best practices and benchmarks rather than go for research, because it makes them feel that it is safer to know about what is happening around and just pick up the best practices and plug in the organization. But more often than not, these best practices do not really work in every organization the way one would expect them to, because there are certain problems with the alternatives. And the main problem, the central problem, is the context. Now, it's very difficult to just, make sure that best practices, which is effective in organization A, will be effective in organization B, which has a very different context. Context can be in terms of culture, industry, country, technological infrastructure, rules and regulations, size, market, employee profile, organization structure, and region. So when the context is different, there is no guarantee that the best practices of another organization will work in yours. And worse, the combination of best practices of other organizations will work in yours. It may or may not happen, because the context has a lot of, it has a critical role to play in defining the impact of programs on performance. Now, when do we use research to improve employee performance? We can't use it all the time, because it also requires a certain level of effort. So when is it most likely to be used? When there is a change in the environment. When there is a new environment, what happens is that we do continue with some old practices, but we also introduce some new initiatives. And we expect that these old practices and new initiatives will have an impact on the performance goals, which may or may not remain the same, but they will definitely be on the aspirational side. But again, because we are in with a new environment, which again has a new context, we do not know whether the impact is desirable and whether it is effective. So if we take the example of the current times, when we are all witnessing the COVID-19 pandemic, we are seeing how much disruption it is causing in the way organizations work. So a lot of organizations have allowed their employees to work from home, but apart from some of the organizations which have tried it before, like ITES organizations, others do not know whether it will work or not, or they do not know what they should do to make it work. So they do not know whether work from home actually will help employee achieve, help the organization achieve the performance goals, whether the impact will be desirable and whether it will be effective. So how do we go about using research to improve employee performance? These are certain kind of steps which an organization may take to implement research. First is define the goal of the research. Second is select variables. Third is collect data. Fourth is interpret findings. You may stop at that stage. Based on the findings you get, you may devise an action plan which will actually help you improve your HR programs and eliminate unnecessary programs. If you are not satisfied with the findings, you may also go beyond this step to identify new variables and then collect data and interpret findings again. So I will show you how you can do research through a particular example. So we'll go through the different steps for a specific example. The example is something which you are aware of, is work from home and performance organization through performance of the employee. When we are defining the research goal, we are defining the end objective for which we want to conduct research. So if we want to define research goals for the current scenario, we will set it as how do we ensure performance of employees in an organization when they work from home. So this is the research goal for which I want to do my research. Second step will be selecting variables for research. So based on my research goal, I will identify the aspects, parameters, dimensions, which I want to use for the research. Now, when my goal is ensuring performance while employees work from home, my variables will be based on the factors which influence performance of employees while they work from home. Now here we need to consider two sets of measures. One is related to definition of employee performance. Now employee performance can be defined in many ways, but we need to select 2, 3, 4 variables which we consider most important for defining performance of our own employees. So I have chosen here employee engagement. You can choose 2 or 3 more variables. The second set of variables is related to the possible influence of employee performance while they work from home. Now these will be a set of variables which you know have an impact while employees work from home. Your knowledge may come from your own experience or from the magazine articles you have read about experience of other organizations or from prior research which has happened. Okay, so here I have given a list of 5 variables which may impact performance. You may give a list of 9, 10 or a smaller list. It depends on what you feel is most important driving force behind employee performance. So the variables I have chosen are work-life balance, communication, job stress, role conflict, and schedule flexibility. These are very well-known variables which are known to impact employee performance in different organizations. So not all variables impact all organizations equally. The impact may vary from organization to organization. So once the variables are selected, the next step is to collect the data. Now, data can be collected from different sources of an organization. One has to decide that who will be the best source for providing which kind of data. For example, employee survey will help to get data on engagement and job stress. Supervisor survey will help to get data on employee engagement, communication, and role conflict. System records will help to get data on work-life balance and communication. HR department surveys may help in getting data on schedule flexibility and communication. So since we are dealing with known variables here, we are talking about quantitative data, which is numerical data. Once the data is collected, it is analyzed. Now, analysis can be done in many ways. Some of the methods are analysis of variance, multiple regression, structural equation modeling. Now, these methods, which method you choose will depend on the number of variables, the sample size, which is the amount of data you have collected, and the kind of relationships which you think exist between the variables. Now, once the analysis is done, which is statistical in nature, we will understand what the findings are. So we interpret the findings based on the data analysis. In my case, I am interpreting findings, and this is an indicative findings which I'm talking about. So I interpret the findings as work from home does not lead to communication problems or schedule flexibility. So it's possible that you may not find any association between work from home and communication schedule flexibility in your organization, though it is a problem in other organizations. So that's a possibility that you will get in your, you will find in your research. You may find that work from home is decreasing work-life balance for employees in your organization, which is decreasing employee engagement. And you may also find that work from home is leading to job stress and role conflict in your organization, which is again reducing employee engagement. So these are the findings which I will interpret from the analysis of my data. Now, what do these findings tell me? That the work-life balance needs to be improved, the job stress needs to be reduced, and the role conflict, which is the conflict between the different professional roles an employee plays within the organization, and the conflict between the professional and personal role of the employee. So how do I minimize the conflict? How do I reduce stress? And how do I increase work-life balance? I can think that one way of doing that is adapting a job design which is suitable for people to work from home effectively. So I may realize that I need to change the job design so that people have work-life balance, people have reduced stress, and people have reduced conflict, because this will help to improve employee engagement, leading to performance. If I have to change the job design, I may also think that I may need to adjust the key performance indicators and the key result areas for my employees. Now, it's possible you get the findings, but you feel that no, something is missing. Maybe there is something else which is unique to your organization, which may be impacting employee performance while they work from home. And it's possible that in kind of factors you have not found from your research of secondary data. So how do you go about collecting data? You would interview people in your organization. So instead of doing surveys, you will interview people, find out if there are any other factors which may be impeding people performance. Now, I have mentioned two findings, or two data which I could collect, two sets of information which I receive when I interview people, employees and supervisors. I find that meetings are creating a problem and team cohesiveness is creating a problem. Okay, and this data is qualitative in nature. You may remember that the earlier data, because that data was based on factors which were existing, those was quantitative. This is qualitative because this is something unique to your organization. You have found it yourself. So this you find is unique to your organization, and you want to just find out what impact work from home is having on these and how is this impacting employee engagement. You go through the whole cycle of research again, and you find that work from home is reducing team cohesiveness, leading to reduced employee engagement. Also, work from home is leading to ad hoc and odd time meetings, which is again reducing employee engagement. Now, your action items will be related to increasing team cohesiveness and streamlining online meetings. So now you know that to ensure performance of employees in your organization when they work from home, there are 4 key things which you need to do: adapting job design, adjusting KPIs and KRAs, improving team cohesiveness, and streamlining online meetings. And you know that as of now, these are the 4 areas of priority. You don't need to do anything else currently. You need to focus on these, and there's a high chance that employee engagement will increase. So this is a representative example of how research can be conducted to find out whether how work from home can help to improve employee performance. Now, you can use other variables for research for this particular goal or for other goals. For employee performance goals, you can use these variables. For HR practices, you can use these. For demographics, you can use them. There are other kind of factors which are at the organizational and group level, which you can use. And there are many other variables which you may want to use for your research. Now, let's talk about some evidence from existing research. I'll talk about the existing research which is available in the area of impact of HR practices on performance. So was a research which was conducted with food managers in Greece, and it was found that selective hiring and compensation policy is most effective in driving organizational growth. Self-managed teams, decentralized decision-making, extensive training and information sharing were effective, not very effective, not less effective. They had an expected impact on growth. And job security, surprisingly, had no impact on organization growth. Another research in manufacturing organizations in China showed that organization strategic flexibility, which is the flexibility which the organization has with its strategic decision making, led to innovative HR practices, which led to employee productivity. Also, when women were at the leadership position, it enhanced the impact of strategic flexibility on employee productivity. Research on professional services in Finland have shown that HR practices which are skill-based or opportunity-based increase physical and social well-being, which increase job performance within the role of the employees. And motivation enhancing HR practices lead to psychological well-being, which lead to innovative job performance. Research in textiles in India have shown that training and development, welfare activities, and compensation and benefits are most effective in driving employee commitment. Recruitment and selection, and promotion and transfers are least effective in increasing employee commitment. Research in manufacturing in Bangladesh has showed that performance appraisal is most impactful in driving performance. Recruitment and selection, training and development, and compensation is least effective in driving performance. Another research across organizations in Netherlands considered HR practices like employee health, motivation, skills, and knowledge for their research, and found that the number of such HR practices employed, employee participation in designing and using HR practices led to effective HR practices, and they also led to job satisfaction and employee productivity. And research in public university in Malaysia showed that career planning, employee participation, and job definition enhance organization performance. So you will see that consistent findings across organizations, across industries. That is not true. And it will not be true because it's not that, the same industries, the different industries and the organizations work in the same way. As I told before, there are, cultural differences. There can be differences at the structural level, process level, employee level, market, customers. There can be a lot of differences because of which the way these programs, these practices impact employee performance may differ. Now, this is something very interesting. This is from Google. Now, Google is known to be very research focused and data-driven organization. And since they have their data at the fingertips, they did an analysis of their own HR practices to find out which are the most effective practices for performance in their own organization. And they came to the conclusion that these 6 were the most important practices which actually had an impact on organization performance. One was that it helps if 20% of employee time is reserved for self-inspired projects. Now, when they started doing that, this is a time when Google employees came up with Gmail, AdSense. So these were the products which employees actually came up with when they were working on projects which they wanted to do. Second is that employees have the flexibility to work with schedule and location of employee choice. So they can work at home, they can work in office, they can work in the gym of Google near the pool, they can work from anywhere, in the cafe, it doesn't matter. And they can choose their timings. Google doesn't care, and it helps. Employees have the freedom to allocate time to diversity projects and initiatives. So they can work on any kind of diversity projects which Google, they want, and it helps to enhance and intensify Google's own diversity agenda without their having to drive it, push it from the top. Employees are recruited using structured interviews and selection committees. So structured interviews, they help in reducing bias, and selection committees ensure that the recruiters do not try to fill up the positions in a hurry. Okay. Then employees have access to information about different roles from corporate leaders. So they can have direct access to corporate leaders, and they have the right to ask questions about different roles which are existing in the organization, and the leaders have the responsibility of responding to them. Also, employees are encouraged to ask questions, seek responses, and give suggestions. So the feedback mechanism has a very, very important role to play in making programs effective in Google. These are some of the organizations which are supposed to have the best HR practices. And incidentally, all of these organizations are highly dependent on the data of the employees generated within the organization to design the HR practices. So with this, I would like to end my presentation, and I would like to take your question and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Smita. That was nice and a crisp presentation. And we have quite a few questions here. Smita, are you there?
Yeah. Yes, I'm there.
So, I think one, and this is perhaps coming from me, as a question that many organizations or really HR folks don't really rely on research. And what advice do you think you can give them? How should they begin in that sense?
Yes. So that's why that was one of the reasons I chose this topic, because research is not actively used in organizations. I think the main reason is that there is lack of awareness about it. So not enough is known. I think a practical starting point will be to find more about it. Okay. So maybe through online courses, it may be a good idea, or just like reaching to, academic faculty, because what I was showing was an academic research. Okay. So reaching out to them to find out how it is done. Okay. So this is something which I feel that there is a big gap between research and practice, because academicians are doing research which is not reaching out to organizations directly, but organizations have a lot to gain from it.
All right. So I think a couple of good questions are here. One question is coming from Sanjeev Bakshi, and he's asking that, for a medium-sized organization, about 500 odd crore, how can you imbibe such practices? So
okay. Yeah. So so practices are there. So I think he means that how do you use research to bring these practices, to execute these practices?
I think perhaps what he would like to look at is, how do you use research if you are a mid-size kind of a company? So how do you create, your HR department to use research?
Okay. So first of all, I think the HR department needs to be aware about how to do research and what are the benefits of it. Okay. So that's the baseline. So they should know how it is done and what do you gain from it. Then only they can design research tools which will help the organization.
Right.
So research needs a little bit of, a fundamental knowledge about how things work. So they should be able to think conceptually about it. And what do they expect? So first of all, it should be clear in their mind that, what is the objective of the practices which they have in the organization?
Right.
That's the first thing. What are they intending to get out of it? Okay, so finally, eventually, the expected benefit is that it will help in performance. But how it will help? So what are you expecting to come out of those? In fact, in that process itself, so if the linkages are clear in that process itself, they will be able to refine their practices.
Yeah.
And then the next step will be collecting data to find out whether they are actually working or not. So one has to be very clear about what practices you are having, why you are having them, what benefits you expect out of them. That's a foremost thing.
Right. And Sanjeev, if I may just add my bit to what Smita has said, when we look at research within an organization and context, normally it is very, very objective driven, because you have some objective in mind, or it is a problem driven, that there is some problem, and therefore you want to look at why that problem is, finding out the reasons behind that. So if you are looking at your own organization and trying to create a research culture around that, perhaps you can look at either of these two approaches. If there's a problem, you start working on that, or
Yeah.
if you have an objective in mind, like Smita mentioned, that you want to enhance performance or effectiveness of the employee, then you could perhaps start creating interventions or research small projects around working that out.
Right, right,
That,
right. And if there are problems, yeah, so that will be the best way to go forward. And I would suggest that if you want to use research to deal with problems, it's better to use qualitative research, because that will give you answers fastest.
right, sure. Vinod is asking a question, Smita, about
Yeah.
is there research done on employee performance improvement based on happiness with their managers and team members? Uh,
Yeah, okay. So happiness is an upcoming area in research. It was not there maybe like 3-4 years ago, but now I think the research world is understanding the importance of happiness. So happiness maybe not be the same as engagement, but it does lead to engagement. So yes, um, it's there, but very limited research has been done. But this can always be done. So if you feel that happiness is an important factor which may drive performance improvement, you can surely take it up.
yeah. There are a couple of questions from Vivek Kaul, and I'm going to sort of answer this in a way. And Smita, please add if there is wanting to talk
Yeah.
about process of research and all of that. So Vivek, I think once you start off your research, as a researcher, these are things that you always have in mind, and you design your research keeping basis of this. But you will have to do a little bit more study if you really want to look at validity and causation versus correlation and all of that. So I think it's like Smita mentioned, you should start off with a small course, or trying to look at what research is, and then take it up from there. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, I think Sanjeev Bakshi again has another question that and which is really what happens in organizations. Sanjeev, I can uh, you know empathize with you, and that's something which we've seen in many organizations, that the HR department, Smita, is not very large, and most
Yes.
of the work that the HR does is into recruitment or in the day-to-day kind of activities there. How can research perhaps be embedded into that there?
Yeah. Okay. So for these organizations, I think it is better to do research with what you have. So if majority is in recruitment, I think they can, and if they want to use research, they can start with finding out how, different, how different parameters which they use for recruitment actually help in employee performance in terms of reducing turnover, reducing absenteeism, and retaining employees. So that is something which it's small, but it can be done. So you must be having certain best practices which you use for recruitment. You can use that to find out whether those best practices are actually helping in retaining good employees, uh, uh, reducing the turnover, reducing absenteeism, and maybe whether you are hiring the right employees. So are they getting promoted? Which will be a good indicator of whether they are employees right for the organization. So you can start with that kind of research.
I think, Smita, perhaps there is also some bit of an action research that you could, look at.
Yes.
You already, as an organization, as an HR, have certain policies that you have from time to time. You start, giving off to the employees, and are they, as effective as what you expected them to be, or the reason that the policies were set in place? I think organizations normally roll out a policy, and then that becomes a part of a policy, and you don't try to figure out whether ये तो कुछ हुआ या नहीं हुआ. It's just that the policy is gone.
Right.
So
Right.
I think
Right.
that could be one aspect that we could look at.
Yes. Yes. So in action research, they will roll out the policy and they will take feedback, and then they will, refine the policy, roll it out, see the feedback. It need not be very, widespread research, but the process should be in place so that you know that you are going in a very systematic manner to collect data, analyze it, and interpreting it. That is very important.
I think there is another, and this is something which I've been talking to quite a few HR and as well as a lot of reading that you do, which tells you that shouldn't customers appraise their employees? Sort of. So when you are looking at this perspective, do you conduct quality customer research for appraising employees? So Sadashiv Nayak is asking this question. So what I think happens in organizations is that uh, there is a business who is your customer and you yourself are the service provider to that customer, and then therefore uh, that's his question. I think you.
Yeah. Okay. So it is not done, but it can be done, especially in service-oriented organizations. So in service organizations, service delivery is very important to ensure customer retention. In these cases, I think research can be conducted, but it has to be at a small scale, because you cannot really expect customers to fill up survey forms. So that is not possible. So you have to do it in a very creative manner so that you can get the information you need from the customers without making them fill up survey forms. So it can be done. There are multiple ways of doing surveys. It can be a video survey. It can be an audio survey. It can be just 2-3 sets of structured interview questions, which you can get them to answer, and then you can interpret the data.
Right. I think one another way, Sadashiv, that you could perhaps look at is also, which is slowly gaining popularity, is a lot to do with text analysis.
Yeah.
You find a lot of written material that is exchanged between, in your 360-degree performance appraisals that happen, in your interviews that you have, exits, and so on and so forth. Then perhaps you can use, that content which people write in order to find out if there is some commonality between them also. So that could be an addition that you could look at in terms of when you're appraising employees as well. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So I think one question from my end, Smita, and perhaps this
Yeah.
you are perhaps a better judge of this because you've been in a consulting firm and organization as well as on the other side in academia. Is that uh, why is there not a mindset of conducting research or data-driven, approaches in organizations, especially in HR? What do you think could be the underlying reason that some of these companies could rework?
So I think that there are many. A lot of companies have that mindset, like HUL, PNG, Tata's. So a lot of conglomerates. So for them, HR policies, programs, they give a lot of emphasis to it because these are big programs. But many companies don't. So I think the problem, first of all, it's awareness. That's a starting point. Lack of awareness about what research is all about, how it is done, and what is the impact. So I'm coming back to what I said earlier. Awareness is missing. The second is you need to have the buy-in from the top management to enable you to collect data from employees. It's not easy. Okay. So apart from HR, the top management also aware about the benefits of research. It's a time-taking exercise. It takes time to define the model, which is what variables you will use. That will itself take time. Second step is identifying what questions to ask. Third is sending it out and following up with people to fill those questions. Fourth is collecting the data, analyzing it, interpreting it. So it's a time-taking exercise. It needs resources. It may need additional people allocated to this research for some time. It may need some effort. So I think that is the problem. So one is awareness, other is lack of willingness to put in resources for research. And I think there is a inherent distrust, if I would say, about the findings. So that's why people rely on best practices, because it's a shortcut to implementing something which you think will work. But I think research will always be more effective.
Sure. I think that there's perhaps a student, Amar Karan, who is asking, can HR students carry out such research for smaller size development organizations as their internship project? I think it's a great question.
Definitely. Definitely. I think it would be a great idea, and it would be a great starting point for both students and companies to start doing research. I think it should be done. Excellent idea.
Right. And another one by Ayushi, who's asking that how will an industrial psychologist benefit an organization? Perhaps you come from that.
Okay. So industrial psychologist can help in identifying the variables. So defining the research question and identifying the variables. This is where the industrial psychologists can help. So they can define the model. They can help in understanding the organization, that what factors are important for the organization to consider, what factors are not, and they can help in interpreting findings for the organization. Okay, so industrial psychologist is basically able to associate the the assessment of employee level variables like employee engagement, employee happiness, to goals of the organization. So that role the industrial psychologist can play.
Sure.
I hope I've answered that question.
I think quite a few questions here on it. I'm just trying to figure out. So a very interesting question, perhaps, Smita. There has been a lot of debate happening over a few years on this, and Rajendra has a question for that. How does a bell curve affect it?
Yes. So yes, it's a very pertinent question, and it is a very controversial question, because so when bell curve, when it came in, a lot of companies went for it, but now people are trying to move away from the bell curve. It has been found that it doesn't work, especially in large organizations. It doesn't work. Okay, it is done for large organizations, but it doesn't work anymore for any kind of organization. Now people are moving to 360-degree appraisal, which is not like a bell curve. So it is not all about fitting people in the curve. It is all about trying to understand what kind of contribution that employee is making from different perspectives to the organization. So things are changing now. People are moving away from bell curve.
Yeah, I think it's quite, surprising that this stayed on for so long.
Yes.
I think
yes. Yeah, again, it's a matter of convenience. So it's very convenient to do it, even for HR, because they don't have to make the hard decisions then. It's all about fitting people in the bell curve. But and what is convenient may not be the best practice.
Yeah, and that's true. I think Neeraj has a question on some online courses to understand the use of research.
Okay, so Coursera will have certain courses, and from the performance perspective, I think you can look at SHR. There are not many online courses available, because generally, nobody talks about bridging the gap between academic research and organizations. So it's still new. It will be difficult to find, but you can check Coursera and you can check SHRM for that.
So, Smita, if an organization, because there have been many instances where organizations themselves, uh, you know, want to go ahead and conduct research or trying to address problems through these kinds of research-based processes, but they are unable to do so because of the kind of people that there is no skill available within the organization to carry out or conduct that particular research, right? In that case, what advice would you give to the organization and some of the newer entrants who have just joined there to up their skills in this area?
Okay. So that is a difficult question for me to answer. I guess so. It will be so. I think they will have to reach out to researchers who do it. Who are in the academic field. There is no option because research is still at a very nascent stage in organizations. So very few organizations actually do research and data analysis
Right.
For themselves. So I think it will not be easy. It will not be easy, but I would suggest that they should start thinking about it. And for the new entrants to organizations, for them, it will be, it would help if they would try to find out more about it. So that's the starting point. I mean, there is a lot of material available about statistical research. So they should start from there, and maybe they may need some outside help to make sure that they do the job well. So maybe that help will be required only once, and then they can, they can do it themselves once they get some hand-holding. But it will be difficult because it is not practiced in organizations as a rule.
There's another interesting question by Vivek Kaul. It's quite a longish question. Yeah, apparently, but this is something that happens in many instances when the sales team, once the sales increases, the sales claims that it is their effort that has got it, and the HR claims that because we hired the right people, therefore it happened, and R&D said the product, and so on and so forth. So how do you look at? So I don't know what Vivek is asking really, whether he wants to figure out, but can this be addressed through research? So
Yes, this is an interesting question.
I have an answer, but I'll wait for you.
Yep. Why don't you answer that?
Yeah, go ahead. You want to do it or?
You can go ahead.
First, my answer here, Vivek, is that you know what? If I was the CEO, I'm pretty happy that the sales has increased, and I don't mind giving a pat on the back to all of them. It's great. I don't want to get into who did it and why. I think all of you did it together, and let's celebrate the increase in sales rather than trying to figure out what. It's like आम खाने से मतलब है types. But seriously, looking at it, pretty serious. Such kinds of questions, I think it's not just very typical to the instance that you said, but many a times we get these kinds of instances in organizations where you're trying to find out a cause and an effect, and that happens post facto after the event has occurred. Now, to me, I think it would be a very difficult proposition to go back and try and figure out who did what and why, what happened. Because of the lack of availability of data which you might need, because how do you capture the data in order to figure out in a research based model? Let's say you want to create a model to find out who did what. So I think to be serious, unless you have planned for it, I don't see that as a possibility post facto once that. I think, Smita, if you...
Yes, I agree. Yeah, so Yeah. So I agree with that. That is very important. If you want to find out the effectiveness of training program which you are going to implement, you can capture the variables which are important to find out whether that training has worked or not. But if you're trying to do a post facto analysis, it is going to be difficult because you do not have data around sales, marketing, and HR. Okay, so it's not that just the training data is going to help. The training data, you will collect the training data, and you will also collect data based on the sales operations, marketing operations, and HR operations to find out whether there is a causal or a correlational effect or not. But that you can do only when you have planned for it.
Yeah. And just to add to this also, this is a very common, concern that L&D departments have as to how do we measure, the performance of a particular training, for instance, or the success, if you may, of a particular training, because that's really quite a challenging kind of a process to create and develop. Although
Right.
Smita,
So one thing which so I would like to say one thing. So one thing which we do is we do it in our in academia that we make the students aware that any training program can be defined in terms of knowledge, skills, and abilities. Okay, so what we are aiming for in terms of knowledge and abilities, and what the training is going to provide. So what are the expectations from the training? So once that those definitions are clear, we can actually measure whether those knowledge, skills, and abilities have been achieved to the level we had expected them. So again, a needs-based analysis it is called. So that analysis is important before even thinking about the training. So first you should be clear about what is the objective of training, what knowledge, skills, abilities are, should be achieved, and therefore how should the training program be defined.
yeah,
So if it is done scientifically, there is a high chance that you can measure the impact of the training and make it effective.
Yeah. I think a couple of more we do have. I might take one or two more questions. We still have, maybe we can extend by another couple of minutes more. So one way would be that uh, I think again we have a question from. I'm not able to figure out the question, but let me try and articulate this in the manner which is more related to this particular seminar. I think how does the HR typically look at this boss subordinate relationship, and do you or have you in your experience come across any kind of a research which tries to figure out ways of looking at this relationship?
So that can be like a 2-hour session at least. So it has been studied a lot. Okay, so boss subordinate relationship is a well-studied relationship in HR literature or organizational behavior literature also. It's a very big area. So I can give just one example, which is in-group, out-group. So it is one of the ways in which subordinate supervisor relationship can be assessed, that there is an in-group and there's an out-group. So your boss will always have an in-group. You may be part of the in-group or you may be part of the out-group. Depending on whether you are in group or out-group, the bosses, so whether you're part of in-group or out-group will define your boss's relationship with you, the kind of work he gives, his behavior towards you, and maybe your contribution to the work, your contribution to the job, and your relationship with him. So that is just one example. There are multiple kinds of relationships which are defined in theory.
Okay. Another, I think I'm going to ask we've already reached 6, and there are a few more questions here, but I'm going to ask Smita a last kind of a question for takeaway for the audience is that what would you recommend the attendees here to do as a reading if they want to do a little more bit of study on this topic?
Okay, so so there are certain books on research methods. I think it's a difficult starting point, I think, but I think it's a critical starting point. So there are certain books on research methods which will give you a basic idea of what research is all about. I think that's the only way to go forward. It's a bit technical. It's not easy to get into doing research very easily. It's not easy. So I will suggest that you go through the research methods, and then it will be very clear about how it actually works.
Right. I think also to add.
Also, yeah, sorry, one more thing. So the other is that if you subscribe to journals, okay, so there are certain journals which may be suitable for different purposes. So I can give you some examples. So there is a human resource management journal, Journal of International Human Resource Management, Journal of Organizational Behavior, Academy of Management Journal. So these are the journals which are considered to be best in the field of organizational behavior and human resources. So if you can get to subscribe to these journals, it will be an excellent way to understand how research is done, generally with what variables research is done, and what kind of statistical tools are used, how data is interpreted, and how the findings are, what is the implication of these findings in organizations. So for that, I think, referring to journals may help a lot. So there is a scholars.google.com. You can go through that to get the journals. So you can also, instead of searching for the journal, you can search for certain ideas you're interested in, like happiness, employee happiness and performance. So you can look for those keywords and you will find some papers which are relevant to your area of interest.
Sure. I think to add to what Smita has just said, the HBR Harvard Business Review has also a lot of articles on this topic, which you might find it interesting. Plus, they also have a lot of reading. California Management. These are all focused magazines, Smita, so that they may not have the typical journal jargon which you might get.
Yes. So better to start with something which is simpler, like HBR, and then go on to journals.
Right. Yeah. So I think we have exceeded our time. Thank you so much, Smita, on behalf of all of us here at the Flame School of Business, and of course the participants, the attendees who have come here today to hear you. So thank you for a brilliant session, and we hope to host you again in the near future.
Thank you, Neeraj.
And thanks to all of you participants, attendees who have come in. I hope you've got to hear a bit something that you did not know, and perhaps something that you will be able to implement. The recording, as always, will be available to you from tomorrow. We will be sending you a link for the recording of this particular session, and you could get in touch with us in case you want any other requirements from them. So thank you once again. Do join in for our next masterclass, which is on July 30th. Please note the revised time. It's at 6 p.m. and not 5 as usual, where we will be having a chat with Pratik Pota, who is the whole CEO and whole-time director of Jubilant Foodworks, the South Asian franchisee of Domino's and Dunkin' Donuts here, on leading through a crisis. So hope to see you guys back here next week again for the next masterclass. And once again, Smita, thank you so much for hosting this webinar.
Thank you, Neeraj, for hosting me today.
Bye-bye. Good evening.
Bye.